Welcome back if you're returning participants of our Artificial Intelligence for Clinicians AI4C lecture series presented by Mass General Brigham AI. And we are delighted to have Dr. Adam Flanders today. AI, are we heading in the right direction? As you know, we have this series every second Thursday of the month from September to May. So this is kicking off our series for this year. And we have a great slate of speakers. As I mentioned today, we have Dr. Adam Flanders. We have Will Su next month from UCLA. Andrei Fedorov from Brigham. In November and December, we have Safwan Halabi from Northwestern. And then we also have a spring slate that we'll tell you about as we get closer. As always, you can view past recordings at the link there. You can go to our massgeneralbrigham.org/AI site and look for our educational resources, or you can go to the link there that has past recordings. There is a survey link in the chat that Carrie Ann has put there, so please do go ahead and fill out that survey for us so we can hear what you'd like to hear about, make any changes that we should about the series. You can, as I mentioned, watch anytime. You can visit us on other LinkedIn and Twitter, see what's going on with Mass General Brigham AI. So as I mentioned today, we have Dr. Adam E. Flanders, who has received his undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan. And many of us have seen him with his favorite Michigan blazer that he wears to conferences. And in fact, he's wearing a Michigan tie today. I should have known. But he also received his MD from Rush Medical College and did his residency in diagnostic radiology at the University of Illinois Medical Center, where he served as chief resident. After he completed neuroradiology fellowship training at the Thomas Jefferson University Hospitals in Philadelphia, he became faculty and has remained at TJU since 1989. He's currently the William E. Conradi Professor of Imaging Informatics. He's a professor of rehabilitation medicine at Sidney Kimmel Medical College and vice chairman of imaging informatics in the Department of Radiology at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. Dr. Flanders has been prominent in many national and international organizations. He has chaired the Radiology Informatics Committee of the Radiological Society of North America, the RSNA, and also the RSNA's Digital Roadmap. He was previously the Informatics Associate Editor for Radiographics, which is an educational journal that many of you are familiar with from the RSNA. He chaired the Neuroradiology RADLEX and Reporting and Medical Imaging Resource Centers subcommittees. And he now serves as an informatics advisor to the Radiology Informatics Committee. He's a member of the Machine Learning, Data Science, and Common Data Elements subcommittees, and he's facilitated several of the neuroimaging-based AI challenges with RSNA in collaboration with the American Society of Neuroradiology, the ASNR. Dr. Flanders is currently on the board of the RSNA, and as such, he's the standing board director for the informatics, AI, and information technology sections. He's past president of the American Society of Spine Radiology, the ASSR. He's a senior member of the American Society of Neuroradiology and a fellow of the Society for Imaging Informatics in Medicine for his outstanding contributions to research and education. Dr. Flanders was honored with the 2021 RSNA Outstanding Educator Award, a wonderful award in recognition of his many contributions through both publications, but also technology enhancements for radiology education. He's kind of a trifecta. He's a clinical expert, he does technical expertise and educates. His research interests have focused primarily on application of MRI in the evaluation of human spinal cord injury. He's been funded by the RSNA, the Nielsen Foundation, the Department of Defense, what else? National Cancer Institute, the CABIG, California Cancer Bioinformatics Grid, and more recently, he's a principal investigator for the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering on the Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center, the MIDRIC, which many of you are familiar with, which has been put together. It's a multi-center collaboration to examine imaging features, pathology, to put together, data from multiple sources. He's also worked with the Cancer Genome Project and so on. But today he's going to talk to us about AI. Are we headed in the right direction? Thank you, Adam. I'll go ahead and stop sharing here, and you can go ahead and share, and you have the floor.
Okay, I have the floor. Wow, thanks, Kathy. I don't know if any of that stuff you just said was true, but thanks anyhow. And I wish I was there with you in Boston and we were going to lunch instead of doing this. But I thank everybody for wasting their lunch hour to hear this. So hopefully not too much of this will be repetitive. And hopefully some of it might even be interesting. But here are my disclosures. And I guess the only thing I want to say is that the views expressed here are my own, and they're not the views of the ACR, the RSNA, or anybody else. So if I do any ranting, it's just me ranting here. So everybody's favorite topic, AI. We have been on a wild ride, haven't we? And the ride just continues. Every year, there's something new that happens that we never anticipated was going to happen before. I'm still waiting for what's going to happen in 2024. That's completely outrageous right now. You know, and of course, the biggest game changer last year, we're not going to spend any time on this because I'm sure you've spent time with prior discussants about ChatGPT, except I love the fact that it beat out every social media platform, bar none, 2 months to reach 100 million users over everybody else, which I think is pretty incredible overall. And of course, we all know ChatGPT can be a Google engineer, it can be a doctor, it can pass all of the examinations, it can write papers, yes, you know, all that stuff, which is interesting. This is my favorite thing is that patients prefer to talk to ChatGPT than they do their own doctors to get advice. That speaks volumes right now, and it's a little bit terrifying. So I agree. You know, it's pretty exciting. I love the technology. I like a lot of where we're heading, but I'm not entirely sure where we're going. We're not veering off course right now, and that it's time to really kind of spend a little more time thinking about a few things. And phrase by Lewis Carroll, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. I hope we're not actually in that direction. I think it's fair to say that the robots are not kicking us out of work. You know, the radiologists and the dermatologists, their jobs are guaranteed. This is just a bunch of nonsense altogether. I don't know if everybody recognizes, I'm sure Kathy recognizes, this is my favorite cartoon growing up, the Jetsons. And this little purple guy, blue guy is the Uniblab. So this was being discussed in the 60s about hiring technology to replace human beings. And I like the fact that George Jetson figured out how to fool the Uniblab and get it thrown out of the office. So anyhow, the real perceived benefits, I think, for healthcare are, I think we all agree, it has potential to raise physician productivity, accelerate detection pathology, predicting adverse events, and may even improve outcomes, may even improve efficiency. But we still need to measure downstream effects of AI, both the good ones and the bad effects of AI. And of course, everybody's favorite, well, my favorite AI prophet is Kurt Langlotz, who made this famous proclamation a number of years ago, which I think is true. You know, AI is not going to replace radiologists, but radiologists who use AI will replace radiologists who don't. And the real question is, are we at that point right now or not? You know, because right now, if you talk to any radiologist on planet Earth, they would probably tell you the biggest issue I have right now is exponential demands for imaging 24/7. The relative workforce is flat. And, you know, keeping up with this work is impossible. Has AI become indispensable at this point? Is AI actually addressing these issues or not? I'd say they are not, but some people may disagree with me. I love the economics behind AI in general because I can't even wrap my mind around this amount of money. But when people talk about $16 trillion of contributions of AI to the economy by 2030, I can't even imagine that. $500 billion in investment in AI research and apps right now, this year, altogether. And everybody is in this AI value chain, running from the people that are building the chips all the way up to entire nation states that are best pretty much betting the entire GDP of their nation to kind of put themselves on the world economic roadmap for the future. And we all know in AI, there's two kinds of players. There are the people that are digging for the gold right now, and then there's the people that provide them with the tools to help them dig for the gold. And who's going to win in the end remains to be seen right now. But at least in healthcare AI, I love this phrase by Warner Slack. Any doctor can be replaced by a computer should be. Uh, but right now, the boon in healthcare AI makes a whole lot of sense. 20% of our GDP is outrageous. We need to find a way to do cost reduction. And there are people that are saying AI applications are going to save us up to $360 billion annually if done correctly. Seems hard to believe. It's, right now, healthcare, they're investing about $6 billion in 2021. It's $36 billion by next year, with about a 50% annual growth in spending, $150 billion estimated in annual savings in a couple of years by now. And of course, I'm an imager. Hopefully, a lot of people on the call are imagers, and we think all of this is about us. But the reality is that there are AI applications or AI opportunities all over the healthcare continuum. This is our space in the upper right-hand corner. It's probably the largest space, but there are others that actually have a big stake in this as well. If you look at where people project, people smarter than me that project where we're going to save all that money, believe it or not, it's not actually an automated image diagnosis. It's more in virtual nursing assistants and robot-assisted surgery altogether. Imaging doesn't even make it on this graph here at all, unless you're going to say it's hiding somewhere here under service operations altogether. But we know attitudes are changing. We think most Americans think that AI can help them with their healthcare adventures, but only 1 in 10 healthcare professionals are using AI right now. 1 in 4 patients are more likely to talk to a doctor or talk to an AI chatbot, prefer it over a doctor. 80% of them find it effective, but 1 in 4 patients probably would not visit a provider right now who is not planning on adopting AI altogether. And this was a survey done by the AMA last year. I don't know if any of you saw it. It's kind of a split between physicians' attitudes about AI right now, about whether they're more concerned or more excited, or they're equally concerned or excited going forward. And if you look at the current use cases that they have, it turns out most physicians really don't have any good use cases for AI right now, or there aren't a lot of good use cases, but they do see the potential in the future. To make sense, if you are a clinician, addressing the horrible administrative burdens that they have to go through right now, dealing with the EMR and so forth, and less being a physician and more, being a clerk, that's where they could see big benefits, and I agree. Right now, we are teetering around almost 1,000 AI cleared devices by the FDA. Most of them are in the radiology space, and we estimate there's going to be well over 1,000 by next year. So the space is getting real crowded in radiology, isn't it? And a lot of these people are still around, by the way. A few of them have been deep sixed at this point. And that doesn't really even account the AI that's already baked in a lot of the imaging products that we buy all the time. Adoption numbers, this is an old article, 30% radiologist adoption. It's clearly got to be well over 30%, probably closer to 50%. A lot of them, people using stroke detection and stuff like that. People are still planning on making additional purchases and so forth. So it's worth talking about what's the ROI in all of this. And, is there a good business case? We talk about it on my campus all the time. My campus is grown to 32 hospitals. So we talk about AI quite a bit. And, if you work with a lot of administrators, a lot of them don't quite understand, what's the finances behind this? How are we going to figure this out? There are a lot of fallacies about direct billing for AI because most of the services are not directly billable, even if there is a CPT code. A lot of them are class 3 CPT codes are just for tracking information. They don't generate dollars. There's no revenue generated from that at all. And if you have a pre-certification for it, it doesn't guarantee payment. Even if you have an FDA clearance, it doesn't guarantee payment and so forth. So the value proposition is really to look for some key performance indicator that you can track a return on the investment. And, some people say, why this seems completely unfair. Why is AI receiving all this scrutiny? Well, it's primarily because it doesn't generate any money. It's an add-on package we're already operating under thin margins. Why make a huge investment in this when it's just cutting into our operating margin? So really, this is the kind of thing where, the cost has to be taken into consideration. Is it actually changing quality in order to give us some value? If you look at some of the literature from last year, they looked at 16 billion claims from all of the states, from all of the United States, and saw already that there's bias in terms of how AI is being utilized. It's used 17 times more likely to be adopted by an academic hospital, metropolitan zip codes, and higher income zip codes. So we're already seeing disparity in how AI is being deployed. And if you look at the claims, most of the claims are in things that kind of make sense, checking out diabetic retinopathy, coronary atherosclerosis, and so forth. And it will continue to rise year by year. For the things that are direct billed, like the stroke applications that have been around probably the longest and have probably been adopted by most people, the payment mechanism through Medicare is through the NTAP, the New Technology Assessment Payment. And this is not a cash cow. This was designed to get people bootstrapped for adopting AI tools, but it's not a reimbursement in perpetuity. In fact, for some places like mine, I don't think we ever collected $1 for NTAP at all. So what are the soft benefits? So here's some great data. Maybe Nina showed this on her talk, because I know that she gave a talk in January about this. You can demonstrate some soft benefits, and she has some really good data through RAD Partners to show that you can enhance detection for a number of different clinical use cases. Makes perfectly good sense. Incidental PE at Yale, wow, an increase in 45%. That's pretty impressive. You can even turn this into decreased hospital costs in terms of diminishing length of stay. There's a couple of studies on that, and even looking at radiologist efficiency for a number of different use cases, ranging from intracranial hemorrhage to fracture detection. Here's a little study that we did looking for the efficacy of pulmonary nodules for a specific tool at one of our community practices, looking at with 9 radiologists. 8 of the 9 radiologists actually saw an increased efficiency in reading chest CTs using the tool, which we're using to convert into some annual savings and an ROI that we can present back to administration that makes people feel comfortable about making the investment in the tool itself. But it doesn't work out that well for everybody. I don't know if anybody saw this. This came off right off the press, published in AUR, looking at one of the hemorrhage detection tools, finding that there was really no significant difference in performance before or after the utilization of the tool, either in the accuracy or in the report turnaround time for detecting hemorrhage. So generating this kind of data is not easy. And if you are a community hospital that wants to use AI, but also wants to be able to demonstrate to administration that it's being used and it's being used effectively and it's actually performing correctly, you need help with this. It's not an easy thing to do, and that's part of the problem. One of the things that I think is going to take off substantially is opportunistic screening tools for AI, because it really kind of systematically leverages the whole concept of incidental findings. And really, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a huge win for patients, discovering disease before it actually manifests itself and get it treated. Lower costs, patients are happier. The system is happier because we're not, tying up a lot of dollars taking care of end-stage diseases and so forth. And you get to retain patients in your system. So there's a lot. You could give a whole talk on this in and of itself. And there's some really interesting things that you can do in diagnosing medical problems with imaging that you never thought you could see before at all, with a high degree of accuracy, like diabetes. So in terms of motivations, I mean, one thing that is worth mentioning, and it's only because nobody wants to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it here, is fear of missing out is a huge motivating factor with the AI tools. There is a lot of emotion tied around this, around acquisition of these tools that kind of needs to be held at bay. You need to be very objective about this process. So I'd say there's a lot of exciting algorithms, demand's accelerating, justifying the expense requires some creativity. What are the benefits, and what could possibly go wrong? Well, okay, so there's been a lot of talk about this. We got to pump the brakes on AI. And if you look at the date on this, this is from 2018. This isn't a recent concept. This has been going on since AI has started to filter into our lives altogether. Even the great godfather, Geoffrey Hinton, who developed a lot of this technology, who basically said, I myself and many other people would be out of a job at this point, and was completely wrong about it, has run away from this altogether, terrified about his creation, kind of like a modern day Oppenheimer, regretting his participation in his little project during the 40s. So we do know there's unintended consequences. I'm sure everybody remembers, when Google introduced Gemini, where where there was racial and gender bias introduced into creating illustrations here of a German soldier, which required them to pull the application out and build some guardrails around it so it wouldn't create stereotypes. This is an incredible example. It's a personal example of our dear friend John Ang, who is a radiologist and informaticist in Maryland. And this is a image. He's a amateur photographer, deeply amateur photographer. This is his aunt and uncle. And he had this picture and he wanted to touch up the picture for his aunt and uncle using Photoshop, which has an AI tool embedded in it where you can just type in what you want it to do. And the AI engine in there will basically carry out your orders. And all he asked said, Photoshop, please change the background to white. Okay, simple enough task, right? And what it gave him was this. And it's astonishing. It's humorous. It's astonishing. It is shocking at the same time. There's a commercial product. This is what it did. And it's every time I look at this, I have a new emotion every time I see what it's done. But this is stuff that's already out in the community. What is the AI even thinking when it does something like this? So keep that in mind. I love these examples. A small computer vision tool classifying a banana reasonably well. Maybe it's a slug, and you just throw a small distractor in there and it thinks it's a toaster. Completely absurd. A toddler knows it's a banana and will always know there's something else in there, but the tools don't know it. And yeah, you put a sticker over a Granny Smith apple and it beats an iPad. I mean, ridiculous. Here's a simple tool I made to identify hemorrhages on a brain CT with reasonable accuracy. And I decided to show it some puppies. And of course, it thought the probability that this was hemorrhage was pretty high as well. But this is serious business. And, this stuff came out relatively early on, looking at things like fundoscopic images, chest x-rays, dermatologic images. And not by introducing something egregious into the image, just by changing the amount of noise on the image, completely changes the diagnosis from benign to malignant or malignant to benign. Take your choice. So there's been a lot of warnings about this. We shouldn't be surprised that we're seeing a lot of this. The little darling of the industry very early on, IBM, that threw a ton of money into this, that said that they were going to develop precision medicine like it's never been seen before, basically has kind of bailed out of this process altogether, in part because AI was not performing the way they thought it would. And of course, why are we still hearing this? Why are we still seeing articles about this? Well, it's because it's true, and it's become more and more of this is being uncovered about racial and ethnic bias and gender bias and age bias and social determinants of health bias in these AI tools. And there's been a lot of really good work written about this. I'm glad you already said you had Judy Jacoya already here to talk about this, because she's done some tremendous work in this particular area. And there's been a lot of good work showing that AI algorithms, yes, they do perform differently depending on what populations you present it with. And how do we correct for that? And how do we make sure it's being done properly? So it's called for a lot of people have had these general calls for saying guardrails are needed. This is a great editorial, if you've never seen it, by our friends John Moggan and Mark Coley from UCSF, that really kind of compares the development process of AI tools to exactly what happened with the process of developing automation in the 737 MAX and what led to that disaster, and what lessons can we learn from that to prevent that from happening. There's been more written now about decision support tools outside of AI altogether, just some of the calculations that we do daily for decades. things like measuring EGFR, which incorporates race based into that calculation, that turns out that it's actually putting people of color at a disadvantage in doing this. And now there's a public outcry to actually remove race from many of these calculations, unless it can be shown that it's providing equity to decision making going forward. So this was something that happened in the middle of COVID, where somebody did a review of all the papers, looking at machine learning to detect and prognosticate COVID-19 using chest X-rays and CT scans. And amazingly, in less than 1 year, there were already over 2,000 studies that met criteria for doing this. They screened them out, found 30 that seemed to meet initial quality review, and found that all of them were of no clinical use. And they failed under the most fundamental criteria about not documenting a reproducible methodology, not using good data, not doing external validation, and not following best practices for developing machine learning models altogether. And if you look at their data, because it's all about their data in many cases, here's their training data. It's all over the place in terms of the classes that were represented across the board. If you look at every one of these, pylons representing a different study, that was their training data. This is their testing data. This is their fault. They're publishing on, really bad data sets. And this was what began this whole concept of Frankenstein data sets. Just slap a bunch of parts together and build yourself a new human being, or do yourself a bad study with bad data. Ron Summers, who is considered by many to be one of the godfathers of machine learning in medical imaging, wrote this editorial because I think he was outraged by this, and basically said a lot of the papers that he was seeing, 500 papers during the COVID pandemic in archive alone, to a large extent, the large quantity and rapid publication of these articles are emblematic of current trends in other areas of radiology AI. So it's like a call to arms to do the right thing going forward. And I think we've kind of turned the course, particularly in the literature and AI research, towards prospective outcome studies, being very critical and putting a lot of rigor in how we do these studies. And there were a lot of people that were asking for this, who basically said for the machine learning and health community, we need better rigor in statistics. We need huge shared data repositories, multi-institutional data repositories, and better reporting requirements overall. If you look at the regulatory record for the FDA NCE, of course, it was also, I would not say exemplary going forward. This is a paper that came out a while ago. CE approved, European approved AI products from 54 vendors, and found most of them there was no peer-reviewed evidence of efficacy. And for the ones where there was, the level of evidence was relatively crummy to begin with. And of half of those papers, they were actually funded by the vendor. How can there not be bias when it's funded by the vendor? And if you look at the level of efficacy, they really kind of focused on diagnostic accuracy, but not the things that make a difference in terms of healthcare, like therapeutic efficacy or patient outcome. This was relatively low. And then you can kind of see, again, it's all about the data. It's so much heterogeneity, the number of scanner manufacturers, the number of centers involved, the number of countries involved. How can you get good results in the performance of these? So a lot of people said very early on, this is, between up until about 2020, of the products that were cleared by the FDA, only 73 of them disclosed even the size of the testing data that was used to begin with. And so it was good back even in 2021, people were already seeing this and basically being outraged by it and wanted to see changes. But here we are 3 years later, we're still waiting for a lot of that to happen. This paper just came out where they went back and looked at everything that's in the FDA right now. Not surprisingly, most of them are radiology devices, and look to see whether they use retrospective or prospective data being better for doing external validation, or did they do any validation at all? And a huge chunk of these didn't have any clinical validation data, and only a minority of them even had prospective data. So, and that led them to conclude, we call on the FDA and AI developers to do a better job of this. Academic institutions could actually play a role in this to help show everybody how to do this. So it leads to this common theme, it's really all about the data, man, in this particular arena. And I think Many of you probably saw this letter because it came out in 2020, again, during the height when everybody had a lot of time on their hands, looking at over 2,000 AI studies and looking at where the data actually was sourced from to begin with. And it turned out most of them came from a single source at the time because people probably didn't know how to do good AI research back then. But for the most part, for the people that had multiple sources, the multiple sources only came from these three places. Came from you guys in Boston, from Philadelphia, where I'm at, and you know, and that was about it, and California. So there's the problem. We still live in the time of a huge data shortage to help us solve these problems. And there have been sites that have been very generous, have tried to put a lot of data out in the public domain, but we still have most of our data siloed. It's monolithic. It's very hard to get to. And the reality is while you think, all you got to do is get a good team of people together to do AI really well. What I've learned from my friend George Shee is that, while everybody thinks this is all about doing great programming, it's really about doing, the new programming is about doing great data curation, unbelievable good quality data curation in order to generate good research and good clinical tools. And I love this. I know this is a direct quote from our friend Elizabeth Krupinski, but she said this in a meeting once, and it was like, I applauded when I heard it. Basically said there's nothing to stop a bunch of kids just finding a data set somewhere, creating a model and publishing on it, and don't even know what they have their hands on and whether it's even useful or not. But the reality is there are a lot of public data sets, but they still remain scarce. The use cases are not broad and diverse enough, and the quality of the data set is pretty variable. So basically, throwing together a bunch of data is relatively straightforward. Creating high quality data that can be used in perpetuity requires a lot of work. And so one example of this is, I guess these are bragging rights, I'm saying. The RSNA has participated in these data science challenges that we started back in 2017, and we're basically on challenge number 10 right now. And what this was an opportunity to bring the medical imaging community together with the data science community, raise awareness about AI and medical imaging, but to also teach data scientists who maybe have no interest in medical imaging, use their skills to help develop great team science, take world-class data sets and labels and annotations to create really world-class models, if necessary, and make a competition around it, like any other data science challenge. And so one of the side benefits is really kind of created a lively, interactive environment and a meaningful experience for a lot of people to create these models, and do it for the world. And then afterwards have the data, the labels, and the models to share with the world afterwards. So our goals with this was to build really well curated data sets, get them labeled by human experts, validate their labels, and then create training, validation, and test sets, and even boost data where needed, using data scientists to help us plan this. But this requires a ton of work. I don't mind telling you, Kathy knows because she's participated in these. You have to start with a good idea that's a solvable problem. The goals of doing one of these challenges is very different from doing novel research because you need a problem that you can solve. You need a leader, hopefully a team leader, someone who's enthusiastic, who has domain knowledge. You have to design the data set. You have to annotate the data set by recruiting experts to do this and motivating them to do it, data wranglers, coordinators, and then host the platform. And here's our annotation tool that we use, where we using the annotation tool that was for chest X-ray, here for our hemorrhage, intracranial hemorrhage detection challenge, and here's one for our PE detection challenge, where we had a ton of labels that we had to attach to this data set. And this is a long process. We have to solicit the data from the sites. We've got to get, approval from the sites. We've got to train readers. We've got to remediate them. We've got to collect the data, curate the labels, adjudicate the labels, normalize the metadata, collate the data sets. And once it's all ready, prepare all the materials for the contestants, launch the challenge, and wait. And we're waiting right now till October 28th for our current challenge, which is the one up here, Lumbar Spine Degenerative Challenge. We've done 10 of these. And every year we have challenged ourselves to do something more complex. This is our first MRI challenge, which uses multiple pulse sequences to manage that and creating the data set, not only for us and for the contestants to make sure it's fair. We started out relatively simple back in 2017, just using hand x-rays for pediatric bone age. We had 250 participants in 37 teams. The next challenge after that skyrocketed. We had close to 1,500 teams participate. Maybe it was because we were offering valuable cash prizes. Jumping ahead to last year, abdominal trauma challenge not only was more difficult from the standpoint of how many labels and how many things we were detecting, but also our data set was diverse worldwide. 23 research institutions, 6 continents, 14 countries, a collaboration with emergency radiology and abdominal radiology. The competitors had to download 460 gigabytes of data to process over 1.5 million image files. Pretty impressive. And even still, we got 1,500 participants and over 19,000 submissions going forward. And here's the leaderboard just showing what it looks like when it's all over. And we acknowledge the top 9 competitors going forward. And this is the current challenge going right now with 35 gigabytes of data. We had over 50 annotators from the American Society of Neuroradiology who gave up their time to help annotate this humongous data set of lumbar spine MRIs, and this will be closing on October 28th. When it's all said and done at the RSNA annual meeting, we celebrate the winners. We give them an opportunity to tell their story on how they solved the problem, and then we hand them a bunch of money and throw a little party for them, and it's a good time. So the challenge is really provide a really great exposure to medical imaging AI to the general data science community, creates these really great data sets to live on in perpetuity. And the winning models, they're available for reuse. And the data sets are being hosted on this new site hosted by the RSNA called the Medical Imaging Resource for AI. So you can look there or on the Kaggle sites if you're interested in seeing what the data looks like. The other initiative, which Kathy mentioned, the Medical Imaging Data Resource Center, was born from COVID money during the height of the emergency, sponsored by the NIBIB. And it's basically a collaborative effort between ACR, RSNA, AAPM, and hosted at the University of Chicago. Started out to assemble rapidly COVID-19 imaging data and link it to medical imaging data from other like-minded repositories going forward. And the whole idea was to accelerate the transfer of knowledge, get this information, get this resource available to AI researchers so they could do data discovery and develop AI tools to maybe help with the COVID-19 epidemic. It started with 5 technology projects, 12 collaborative research projects, 23 institutions going forward. We are bringing in data not only through the American College of Radiology's Triad system, but also through the RSNA system into a common repository for AI researchers to access. But this was staged appropriately and scaled appropriately. So we've taken data from multiple institutions simultaneously, get it into the repository, and then make it available for benchmarking, challenges, virtual trials to academic users, industry users, and even regulatory people. And the process for curating the data required a lot of normalization, in some cases, annotations and labeling, doing diversity assessment and so forth. But one of the unique things about MIDRC is that we peel off 20% of the data and hide it in a sequestered commons. No one ever gets access to this data, so that there's never a problem there should not ever be a problem with data leakage, that this data is pristine. No one will ever be able to train on it. It can be used for testing, for regulatory, for benchmarking, and so forth. What MIDRC is focused on since the start is to see how closely our data actually matches the data from the US Census. Are we representative of all, ages, genders, ethnicities, races, and so on, and even some economics classes based on the distribution of the information. But we're cognizant of that going forward. And then we deliver it on this data portal, which is very versatile. It allows you to basically pick out a lot of different metadata features and then select a specific cohort that you're interested in. And then, of course, the data itself is linked to a number of other repositories to get a whole host of supplemental medical information as well. Right now, there's over 500,000 studies located on the portal. We've got a very complex but comprehensive committee structure around MIDRC to kind of cover the bases, including industry research, data policies, and procedures. And we've now been incorporated into the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, their biomedical data fabric toolbox. We are a first round performer selected for helping manage medical imaging for this much more ambitious project to interconnect repositories across the country so that a user could potentially query multiple repositories simultaneously and get a return on their data. So not that every MIDRC has to own everything, but we would potentially have access to indexes of multiple other repositories. And here's a first pass at what this index looks like, where we're actually, you make a query and it's actually delivering information from multiple repositories simultaneously. So what makes MIDRC really kind of unique, it's as tools, high quality data, the sequestered commons, linkages to other data commons, sophisticated data discovery tool. It has a diversity and bias calculator, has metrology tools to help you design your research, and seminars for community building and so forth. So it's a lot more than a data repository. It's basically an entire ecosystem to help do AI research. And now that MIDRC is pivoted outside of COVID altogether, we're focusing on other things like stroke, like oncology and so forth, but the infrastructure is already there. So it is about good quality data and what does the future hold. And one of the things that I think everybody has to be aware of is that there's new legislation that is out there. This is from the US Department of Health and Human Services that basically said that all health IT vendors who develop or supply tools will be required to disclose more technical information to clinical users. So this is on them to begin with. They have to explain steps that they have taken to manage potential risk. There's this other legislation called Section 1557 that has come out of the Affordability Care Act, which basically is something that we all thought existed all along, that we prohibit discrimination based on race, color, national origin, or disability. But they've made it very clear now that it also applies to the tools that we use, patient care decision support tools, which includes AI. And they're putting this on the provider entities. The covered entities have to make reasonable efforts to mitigate the risk of discrimination from the tools that they have purchased. It is not on the vendors, it is on the people that are using the tools. So you can imagine if you don't have the infrastructure to even address this question, you might be putting yourself at risk. Some of the folks like the ACR is actually making a valiant effort right now. So they have this catalog of vendors where vendors self-disclose information about their tools, about the data that was used, the distribution of the data, and they have a very extensive list of bits of information that folks have to disclose. But if you look right now, most of it is unknown or empty. This is going to require more cooperation on the vendor side to provide this information so we can consume it. There's another initiative through ARPA-H to come up with great ways to evaluate, to do continuous monitoring of AI tools going forward. And ACR also has, through their National Radiology Data Registry, has a way potentially using their triad infrastructure where they can monitor the performance of tools that are already installed in multiple sites across the country and do benchmarking. So we are slowly righting the ship, I think, with AI, but some of the early research did not go, or the FDA releases did not undergo a lot of scrutiny, but there's been a lot of outcry. The Biden-Harris administration has made releases. A lot of very important and high-profile areas have written editorials and perspectives saying that we need more regulatory oversight. This came out relatively recently, particularly about the Section 557 requirements about what Health and Human Services needs to do for us to deliver on the fact that we know that the tools that we're using are not biased at all, and that we have ways that there'll be laboratories and certification programs to make it easier for us to use these tools safely with our patients. We also need to have better explainability, and this has to be very transparent, or this is going to be part of the problem as well. There's been a calling to say, hey, we don't need the government to do this. What we ought to do is create a nationwide network of healthcare assurance laboratories with a standardized process for checking performance on these tools, and then do the reporting in the same way across all the different labs across the country, kind of like what Good Housekeeping used to do for us way back in 1909 to ensure that we bought a toaster, it was not going to blow up in our kitchen. The FDA was falling behind, but I think the FDA has gotten the message, and they have a lot of publications that have come out about continuous monitoring and so forth. And they've been trying to follow, as well as a lot of other manufacturers and other governments, looking at good machine learning practice for medical device development and guiding principles. And they have 10 classic principles that really kind of speak to the heart of a lot of these things, the appropriate kind of, but a lot of the common themes are about data sets, good quality data sets, good quality engineering, performance assessment, testing assessments, and so forth. Even the National Institute for Standards and Technology has come in on this as well. And this was a nice thing proposed by David Larson, which kind of took taking the analogous approach that you would use for approval of a drug and doing the same thing with AI tools, where you evaluate them in a controlled environment, find the best performer in a clinical environment, and then deploy the best performer in a bunch of installed sites, and then track that over a period of time. Likened to the phase 1 to phase 4 concept on any kind of a clinical trial for a new drug. And if there needs to make changes, you go back to an earlier phase and fix it. So what do we need to do? Yes, maybe we need to be a little more intelligent in our approach. I think the theme here, if I had any message, I'd say here, sure, big data is great, but I'd say good data is even better. That should really be the focus here. The future of the whole industry and research behind this is on data quality. And I think a lot of rigor is required to do true external validation. Data quality is paramount. It requires work. A lot of effort has to be put into this, but it will be worth the effort ultimately. But it means less Frankenstein data sets. A lot of the journals right now won't even accept a lot of this stuff right now because because of the checklists that have been incorporated. But vendors are going to be held to task and have to demonstrate that there's lack of bias and drift. Particularly, most of the people they're selling to are community hospitals that do not have data scientists. MGH has no problem doing this, but most people who are purchasing tools like this have no way. They're just putting themselves at risk, or maybe they won't purchase at all. So vendors are going to need to be fully transparent. Covered entities need easy access to their own performance data, real access, and to help them undercover bias. And I think, again, vendors are obligated to do that for us. And with that, so I wanted to finish a little bit early. I want to thank you. It looks like a vast wilderness out there for AI, but I'm confident we'll have a lot of shopping centers built there soon. So thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Adam. That was wonderful. You covered a tremendous amount of ground, and I love that you covered two main things. Really, the beginning, which is the data piece, and all the efforts that have to go into it, and then the end piece, which we're not doing so well at, which is the validation piece, the clinical validations showing the so what. But let's start with the data piece. And I know you've been involved in, and there have been organizations involved in so many efforts to try and get more diverse data, better data, help with tools for curation of the data, and so on. And quite frankly, some of the beginning FDA tool requirements didn't really differentiate whether a vendor described what data things were trained and tested on, and so on. And I'm glad to hear that that's now required. Why is this so difficult to get people to share data? And then we have a couple of questions in the chat here, and a bunch of kudos as well from Felipe, outstanding. But a question here regarding, can you comment on PHI concerns that face the creation of multi-institutional image data sets? There are concerns with some radiology images, facial reconstruction, and for example, on CT and MR, as you know, and in ophthalmology, where many organizations, including the US government, treat retinal images as PHI.
Mhm.
What
Wow.
how do you handle these concerns? Are you concerned? What are some of the things that can be done to allay some of these concerns around perhaps uh,
We,
disclosing this information?
well, I mean, I think it's a totally valid concern to begin with, because I think for some sites, they just said that, their administration are not comfortable with releasing any data at all, because they think if there's any leak of any PHI itself, it's putting them at risk. I think the proof is that, over time, for you and I doing this 20 years ago and saying, I'm going to contribute some of my images, would have been considered heresy. No, you can't do that. It's impossible, and certainly right after HIPAA came out and everything else, but over time, as data repositories have been developed, a lot of institutions have figured out the right way to do it. You can show that there are tools that are 21 CFR approved that can clean out the DICOM header and so forth. But if you follow certain rigorous processes, and I didn't go into this, but like in MIDRC and even for the RSNA challenges, all of our data is checked twice. So for people, if you don't have a BAA or or some kind of affinity domain contract, if it leaves your institution, it's got to be de-identified. That's the requirement. So we require every site to de-identify the data, and in many cases, we ask them to use the tool that we approve of because we know it will wipe it clean. And then it's checked again before it's actually brought out. So like the RSNA becomes the convener of that data, and they have a group of people that's all they do is go over that data and ensure that there's no burned-in pixel information and that the DICOM headers truly are clean. And they've actually found cases where there's stuff that might not pass muster because there's burned-in pixel data and so forth. But some of it is just purely cultural. Institutions have never done it before. And sometimes it's just worthwhile showing people what the data use agreements look like from other institutions, and data sharing agreements, sharing all that documentation with administration and privacy and security officers. We've gotten all of these luminary institutions to contribute data, and it's really this isn't for fun and games. This is actually for the good of, without getting too dramatic, it is for the good of humanity altogether. But it is a valid concern altogether if it's not done properly. And I think that's part of the problem altogether, is a lot of people think managing imaging data is easy, and it isn't at
It is
all.
the hardest part, and I think we've mentioned and talked about this a number of times. It's 70% of your project is that data wrangling piece that happens up front. And I'm pretty sure MIDRC has different tools for removing burned in pixel data. Now it's different for each vendor, and we only know in those tools, all the vendors that we're aware of. And there are also probably defacing tools for some of the 3D reconstructions, I would imagine, on MIDRC.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's funny you bring it up, because I was just on a call prior to this, our data quality and harmonization group, and they're very focused on this right now, because the approach to this is all over the place. One of the big concerns right now, so if you do head imaging, you're doing AI with head imaging, as you know, if you do skull stripping, there are concerns that you've actually ruined the data. You've taken some of the key pixels, out of the outside of the image. It's going to completely change the way an algorithm might perform. And then, of course, if you were going to use it clinically, who skull strips any clinical images? So now you have to start skull stripping all of your clinical images just to get a clinical algorithm to work. And then the question is all of that necessary? Is it even possible to re-identify another human being, in the general population? There's been work done on this. We know, like, I think Elliot Siegel did some of this stuff years ago and showed, yeah, for a finite group of people, you take 20 people and I'll get their picture and I'll get their CT scans, I can match them up. But if you're talking about the general population in general, then so a lot of the discussion we've been having is we don't know what at some point will there be, and we also know it's institutionally based. Some of the institutions that have donated head images have said nothing leaves our institution without skull stripping. That's our policy. So we would rather have their data than not. So we'll take those images. In some cases, what we've done is we said, well, we want to make the imaging all the same. So what we'll do is we'll hold all of the unadulterated images in reserve. We will skull strip them and put them on the public site. And then if somebody wants to use the unadulterated images, they can sign up for a special use of that. But we won't just put them on the public site. So we're trying to deal with that, or dealing with the idea of, do you deface instead of skull stripping, which to me would be a better thing for dealing with anything in the brain, but it's not going to help for anything for oncology of the head.
So very interesting. So still many efforts ongoing and trying to improve data. And we know the model is the data, and we've got to get better data. Want to move on to one other issue that you talked about in the beginning, and that is that we have done a very poor job of showing that these are, the so what. Do these really help? And there have been a number of studies that we've seen more recently that are kind of showing, it's sort of equivocal. Some we're seeing, maybe an improvement in turnaround time. Others we're not seeing improvement in diagnostic accuracy and turnaround time. What do you think the best benefit? Everything's been focused on the diagnostic piece. What are some of the other things that we should be targeting? You mentioned, opportunistic screening types of things, or automation of quantitation and sort of back office. Do you think those are going to be the more impactful kinds of tools?
Well, I definitely think opportunistic screening will be impactful altogether. And like I said, it will make everybody happy, patients happy. It's going to make administrators happy because it's bringing patients back in to get their problems solved inside the system. But to be honest, since I feel the pain of being overworked, with amount of work right now, one of the things that's on my wish list is I wish there was a normal detector for everything. Because right now, the world that radiologists live in right now is the lists are not clear. The lists are endless. They don't stop. But what we really want to do is, out of everything that's hiding on that list, which cases can wait till tomorrow and which should I look at right now? Because there's something important on there. And it's not, so what I mean is a general normal detector, some foundation model that that can put all the normals aside, not to mean that they don't get read, but they don't get read first. Because right now, as you know, it's most people read by date and, who's screaming the loudest. But to me, what's impactful for patient care is to find out somebody has a clot in their lungs that we imaged 9 days ago and we're not seeing it until now. That, I think, your heart sinks, there's a patient on the other end here, and there's got to be a way to do that. So that would be my one thing I want. It's not an easy ask, but
detecting normal, but that's a problem that we have in terms of our regulatory. Now that would be easier to do in Europe, where you can get approved in one fell swoop, lots of findings on a chest X-ray, whereas here we have to do, ka-chunk, one by each, which makes that a little bit more of a problem. We have a question here from, and I don't know if it's it's an anonymous attendee, but saying, what are the lessons learned from radiology that can be applied to histopathology? We're trying to go digital at across Mass General Brigham in our pathology. So, we did PACS last century. You think might be applicable to histopath around these issues?
Oh, you mean about creating AI tools, or
that's what they are interested in. Yeah.
I assume there's some general lessons that we can learn just from the things that I guess that I already talked about, but I don't know how they apply directly to histopathology. But like, for example, if you're worried about like data set selection for histopathology, like I have a good sense for what you need to do to create a good data set around a specific clinical use case. But around histopathology, what are all the variabilities around a tissue type or a tumor or something like that, so that if you're going to train a model, that it understands all those nuances to begin with? Because part of me, and that's based on my own ignorance, is there, if you're looking at a liver, a hepatoma in the liver, do they all look relatively the same except for the grading? But are there some hidden features inside the histopathology that we don't know anything about? And I don't know, are there any biases in histopathology right now that could be uncovered? I'd say right now, since nobody ever anticipated that there was racial and ethnic bias by the performance of AI tools for imaging, I'd be willing to bet that the first thing that people ought to do when they're doing this with pathology is to see if there's some kind of there's something hidden in the pixels that will help you determine you could determine someone's race, without knowing it, based on their liver tumor. Because I think we discovered that relatively late in the game. Maybe we ought to start with that. That should be one of the first things people look at, because there are things that you can predict with, to me, one of the most exciting things that you could do with imaging was the stuff that we can't see, like predicting the expression of the genomic features of brain tumors with a high degree of accuracy for some reason, and something a real well-trained neuroradiologist could never do, but yet the AI tools could do simply because of the way that they look at the pixel data, but the pixel data gets analyzed. Could you do something similar with that? Could you do something similar with that with histopathology that even they can't tell, but they can only do it with molecular markers?
Mm-hmm. That'd be very interesting. So the things that the human visual system just can't see.
Yeah.
And one last question, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and that is, the prospective trials that we really need to do often it sort of teeters on, and we're not doing a good job of putting these tools at the point of care into the tools that people use. So what do we need to do around clinical implementation that could improve not only the use of these tools, but maybe even the adoption of these tools, and maybe even the benefit?
Well, so you mean, and you're talking about a clinical trial, you're just talking about what's the best way to deploy one of these tools in the clinical environment?
Yeah.
Well,
Is there something lacking that we could improve upon to make clinical implementation more seamless, a little bit better, and that kind of thing?
Well, I think it kind of runs the gamut. Part of it is the selection process. First of all, it should start with a problem, and is there an AI tool that can address the problem? Because a lot of it starts with the FOMO that says we need these tools. Well, why instead of asking the question the other way around? But I think the biggest thing that concerns me is that people make these purchasing decisions, they deploy the tools, but then they don't evaluate them afterwards. And to me, the common things that you need to know is, first of all, are they being used at all? Does anybody ever invoke the tool to begin with? Are the audience that it was designed for, because it's not all for radiologists, it could be designed for clinicians, are they actually using the tool on a daily basis? And are they using it for the right reasons? And you need help tracking that kind of data, let alone the fact you want to look at the performance afterwards and see is the tool performing at the same level of way it was advertised, and what are we doing to mitigate the errors? Because I think some of it is tools are not being used the right way. People's understanding of what the limitations of the tool is not well, so training is not very good. But I think most of the deployments and the information that have given back to the users is not the full spectrum. And again, like I was saying, if you want to develop that information, it requires a lot of work. It requires extra people with certain skill sets that can tease out a lot of that data. When was the application launched? How long did they use it for? When did they close it? Did they take the information and incorporate it inside of the report? Did they agree with it? Did they dismiss it? That kind of stuff is not being, that kind of information is not, I think if you go out in the community where most of this stuff is being bought, they don't have the resources or the time to do it.
And also to start with the good clinical question. What are you
Yeah.
trying to what's the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
Dr. Flanders, that was fabulous. Really enjoyed your presentation, and thank you for answering questions, and thank you for spending your time. And attendees will see you next month. But thank you, Adam. Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for the invite.
Take care.
All right.